Holland, the Netherlands. What's behind these endless lines of toy houses? Behind the ocean of tulips, legalized marijuana coupled with same-sex marriages. This country can boast not only stale stereotypes, but also a lot of the things they don't tell tourists about. That's what we'll look at now. And according to tradition, the longer you watch, the more interesting it will be because the most unexpected thing somehow always appears at the end of the video. So, the Netherlands in the remote mode. I'm Hustler, let's go. Let's start perhaps with the most important stereotype, that the Netherlands and Holland are one and the same. In fact, this is not quite true. The Netherlands is the official name of the state, which includes 12 provinces. And since the late Middle Ages, the most developed of them are North and South Holland. And most often, the inhabitants of these provinces traveled around the world. It also produced and still produces most of the goods for export. Therefore, the name Holland is widely known. By the way, the fact that the Netherlands is called Holland is very annoying for the Dutch themselves. The Dutch government is sure that this is harmful to the image of the country. According to officials, the word Holland has become an anti-brand associated with drugs and prostitution. Well, let's just say that such a reputation didn't appear out of thin air. Prostitution in the Netherlands is officially allowed. It has been legalized since 2000 and brings an average of about $100 million a year to the economy of this country in the form of taxes. All brothels are under strict government control. Another stereotype is associated with tulips. The Netherlands has been associated with these flowers for centuries. Many people believe that they appeared there, but in fact, their homeland is Turkey. Tulips came to Europe from the Ottoman Empire only in the 16th century. In 1562, the first large batch of Turkish tulips was brought to the city of Antwerp. Gardeners from Europe were very fond of this flower and saw the similarity between its shape and the traditional Turkish headdress. They gave it the name tulipan, from tulben, the Turkish turban. Today, the Netherlands is considered the largest producer and exporter of tulips in the world. And not just tulips, 75% of all flower bulbs on Earth are of Dutch origin. But generally speaking, the birthplace of flowers is changed by globalization, like everything else in our lives. The bigwigs of the flower business now grow flowers mainly in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The Netherlands is also moving production to these countries. However, it is still the world leader in the flower trade. But at the same time, an increasing number of goods is imported. The exception is bulbous flowers. They are grown in the country, as before, in large quantities. In a good year, small farms, for which this has been a traditional occupation for several generations, sell up to 10 billion tulip bulbs. This is 70% of the total production of tulips in the world. They sell flowers on the Flora Holland Flower Exchange, which has been trading flowers for more than a century. It includes 5,000 companies that grow flowers. The auction is carried out using an auction clock, which shows the current price of a particular lot instead of the time. The bidding duration is less than a minute. As soon as the buyer sees an acceptable price on the clock, he presses the button, stopping the auction. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. The underwater part is giant hangars with huge refrigerators, special rails, and electric cars that scurry through this ocean of flowers. But let's move from the flower hangars to the city streets. What ordinary people do if they see that it's raining outside? They take an umbrella with them before going outside. But the inhabitants of the Netherlands do not do this, preferring raincoats. After all, you can't ride a bicycle with an umbrella. This is a favorite transport in the Netherlands. There are more of them here than there are residents, 18 million against 17. During the Second World War, the German army exported a very large number of bicycles from Holland. For this, the Dutch still make fun of German tourists, saying, "Return our bicycles." Despite the craze for bicycles, the Netherlands holds the record as the country with the lowest rate of injuries while riding this vehicle. And cycling under the influence of alcohol is strictly punishable by law, as well as driving without a flashlight in the dark. Bicycles are popular, among other things, because except for the rain, nature does not particularly interfere with cycling. There are almost no cracking frosts here, so it's only fitting to ride all year round, as they say. Well, if there comes a rare winter when all the rivers freeze, then they organize the famous skating marathon throughout 11 cities with a length of 200 kilometers. They also have skates, one of the oldest traditions. Whatever we think about the super advanced and developed Netherlands, they can be called a country of villages with a clear conscience. Despite the highest population density in Europe, it is easier to meet a resident of the countryside than a city dweller. And how could it be any other way if there are about 60 cities in this country, of which only 4 are large? But there are as many as 479 villages, hence another achievement of this state. The Netherlands is among the leaders in the export of agricultural products. Only China, the United States, and Germany are ahead of them in this. Also, this country is a world leader in the export of seeds, live trees, and plants in general. For example, the country sells seeds for a couple of $1 billion a year. At the same time, it does not supply the seeds of genetically modified products to the market. And all this despite the fact that the Netherlands cannot boast of huge territories. The area of the country is as small as our Penza Oblast. But this agro-abundance was not always there. Production has increased so much thanks to the country's new agricultural policy, which it adopted 2 decades ago. Produced twice as much for half of the available resources. Since 2000, farmers have reduced water consumption for irrigation by 90%. They have almost completely abandoned the use of pesticides in greenhouses, and since 2009, Dutch poultry farms and slaughterhouses have reduced the use of antibiotics by 60%. From the height of a quadricopter flight, you can see unusual structures that resemble giant mirrors that sparkle in the sun during the day and emit a strange internal glow at night. This is how the Dutch greenhouse complexes look, and the area of some of them reaches 70 hectares. Thanks to them, the country, which is not that far from the Arctic Circle, has become a world leader in the supply of tomatoes. The Netherlands is also considered the best supplier of potatoes and onions, and the second largest producer of vegetables in the world. The country owes such achievements in agriculture to its Wageningen University, which is considered the best agro-industrial research institute in the world. This university is a key element of the Food Valley, where technological agricultural startups and experimental farms are developed. At the same time, the future of agriculture in the Netherlands is taking shape not in the negotiating rooms of large corporations and agricultural giants, but on thousands of family farms. It is also the lowest country in Europe. 26% of its territory is located below sea level. Approximately 60% of the population lives as much as 5 meters below sea level. And the lowest point of the country, Zuidplaspolder, is at 7 meters. Naturally, most of the territory is protected by dams. For example, the country's main airport is Schiphol, which serves millions of passengers a year. And what about the people? People in the Netherlands are also peculiar. To begin with, the inhabitants of this country are considered the tallest people in Europe. The average height of an adult Dutchman is 184 centimeters, and the average height for women is almost 170 centimeters. Scientists explain this feature as a genetic predisposition and the high level of nutrition and healthcare in the country. According to the researchers, the consumption of a large amount of dairy products plays a significant role in this, and also the fact that the Netherlands consistently occupies the highest positions in the rankings of the happiest countries in the world. Young people are especially happy with their country. According to a study by the National Statistics Office of the Netherlands, 94% of adolescents aged 12 to 18 years say that they are very happy with the conditions in which they live. To be happy, they are not at all hindered by the sex question, which will be discussed later, or even the legalization of marijuana, which every adult resident can buy in a coffee shop near their home. But for selling soft drugs to minors, you can get a very serious penalty. At the same time, a person who bought weed in a coffee shop has the right only to use it in an amount of no more than 5 grams per person. And at home, you can grow up to 5 cannabis bushes for personal consumption. At the same time, the level of marijuana consumption in the Netherlands is one of the lowest in Europe, as well as the death rate due to drug use. 8 cases per million inhabitants. For example, in the UK, this figure is 50. Religion and Bible Belt. The Dutch have an interesting attitude to religion. Most of them are atheists. That's 40%. 30% are Catholic, and 20%, including the royal family, are Protestant. Most of the Protestants live in the north. This region even bears the appropriate name, the Bible Belt. The inhabitants of these parts are known for their religious conservatism. They are very serious, reserved. Their whole life is subject to strict order, and they don't like visitors. Tourists visiting the Netherlands are strongly advised not to visit these areas. By the way, there is a very interesting tradition associated with excessive religiosity. In the Netherlands, it is not customary to curtain the windows. It is believed that it appeared due to the citizens' commitment to the Protestant religion. So the Orthodox Dutch show that they have nothing to hide, and their way of life is consistent with Christian moral principles. Perhaps the same principle of openness is followed by the Dutch when they arrange joint gatherings in saunas. At the same time, the Dutch traditionally bathe naked. In general, there is no excessive zeal for work here. More than half of the working-age population of the country works part-time. This is much more than in any other rich country in the world. At the same time, the Dutch are one of the most traveling nations in the world. At the age of 20, 40, they often work and live for several years in other countries. So it is no wonder that the citizens of the Netherlands have a peculiar attitude to corporate culture. And now it's time to see what they have there with the protection of children under such laws. Here, in fact, as in many European countries, by law, all primary school students must receive sex education. This education begins in kindergarten from the age of 4. 8-year-olds learn about gender stereotypes, and 11-year-olds discuss sexual orientation and contraception options. Whether this is good or bad can be discussed in the comments, but for now, we will note another interesting feature. It's perfectly normal for dads to take the day off from work to be with their kids. Dutch employers have long been accustomed to Dad's Day, and often use it as an advantage during interviews or contract negotiations. And mothers here also have their own peculiarities. From generation to generation, here is passed on such a subject. What do you think it is? I bet you didn't guess it. This is a chair for women in labor. More than 30% of women prefer to give birth at home. At the same time, an ambulance is not on duty near the house because resuscitation is expensive. Even if the birth takes place in a hospital, postpartum monitoring is carried out at home, and the woman in labor is normally discharged a few hours after delivery. There will be a visiting nurse, Kramzorg, whose duty is to teach the newly minted mother to manage the child, feed, bathe, change diapers, etc., help with the child when the mother is resting, and run the household, wash the toilet and bathroom, clean the room where the mother and child are, clean the kitchen, wash and iron, change bed linen, and all this for 8 days, for several hours a day. All this is paid for by insurance. The state pension there is about 1,000 euros, but a corporate pension is often much bigger, as well as own pension savings. However, this does not mean that when you see cheerful Dutch pensioners on cruises and other excesses, they are workaholics who saved up money for all their lives. After all, there is still the so-called old money. A large percentage of all gray-haired European travelers are simply descendants of quite rich people. Some of them have a property for rent, some have an inheritance, a small production, a restaurant, or just an amount in the account from previous generations. This is no wonder because the Netherlands is a country that has created financial inventions in Europe and in the world, without which it is difficult to imagine today's reality. And whether an evil or good financial genius could come up with these things, we'll see in a second. Stock exchange and Dutch colonies. In 1602, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange appeared, which is considered the oldest of the existing ones. The Netherlands left a lot of traces in geographical names around the world. For example, New York was founded as a Dutch colony and was originally called New Amsterdam. The Dutch were also the first Europeans to set foot in Australia and New Zealand. Australia was then called New Holland, and New Zealand got its name in honor of the province of Zeeland, located on the territory of the Netherlands. As many as 3 Caribbean islands, Bonaire, Sint Eustatius, and Saba, are still part of the Netherlands. The inhabitants of these islands are full citizens of this country and have the right to participate in the elections in the European Union. In general, this historical time when Holland turned the whole world on, so to speak, on the ship's mast, is quite interesting and cautionary. Well, let's take this historical moment, for example. Dutch East India Company. Many people have heard such a phrase, the East India Company. But not everyone knows that there were several of them: British, Danish, Portuguese, French, Austrian, Swedish. So when the Netherlands emerged as the foremost maritime and colonial power in Europe, it was the Dutch East India Company that was one of the largest in the world. It was a state within a state. It had not only a monopoly in the conduct of foreign trade, but also the rights to conclude international trade agreements, navigation, duty-free transportation of goods to the mother country, the creation of trading posts, fortified coastal fortresses, the conduct of legal proceedings, the maintenance of the armed forces and the navy. For that time, it was the coolest multinational corporation, which, before our eyes, are modern digital giants gradually turning into, entangling every inhabitant of the planet with their networks. All they have to do is to build floating digital cities that will drift in neutral waters, and then they will not be states within a state, but states outside of states. Those who have carefully watched our past videos will probably now understand why the Western scientific community has sharply increased interest in the history of these East India companies, mega corporations of their time, which were often much stronger and more influential than individual states, although they formally acted in the interests of the country in which they were created. The Dutch East India Company was governed by a board of directors of 17 people, and in 1602 became the first joint stock company in the world, as it first offered its founders to share responsibility for the fate of sailing ships, and of course, to receive a share of the profits from new lands, treasures, and spices, which were valued in Europe for their weight in gold. After all, only one ship out of 3 returned home, while the rest became victims of force majeure, pirates, storms, etc. But a successful flight brought a huge profit. Thus, the percentage of the possible profit of the shareholder directly depended only on the amount of his contribution, the measure of which was the first shares in the world. Until 1644, the dividends were paid in kind, imported goods, mainly spices, then only in money. By 1669, the company was the richest private firm in history, including over 150 commercial ships, 40 warships, 50,000 employees, including 25,000 employees in Asia and 3,000 employees in the Netherlands, a private army of 10,000 soldiers. The company was involved in the political disputes of the time along with the states. Thus, in 1641, it independently, without the help of the Dutch state, knocked out its competitors, the Portuguese, from present-day Indonesia. For this purpose, armed detachments from the local population were created at the company's expense. Moreover, in several colonial territories, the company had the right to mint coins. But of course, the history of Holland is not limited to the East India Company. It has everything: the treachery of monarchs, civil wars, the flight of capital, the increase in internal taxes, and therefore the rise in prices. But this is the subject for a separate big video. Or for example, the foreign public debt that is a trending topic now was quite efficient 300 years ago. The Dutch were the first to realize that you can trade your debt and trade at a profit. Or here's another scheme. Imagine a bank that accepts deposits, issues bonds to borrowers, and pays interest, say 6% per year. Every year, borrowers gather and receive interest throughout their lives. If one of them died, then his share is divided among the living ones. The loan is considered repaid after the death of the last borrower. The loan amount is not refundable. According to this scheme, every year it is enough to have a 6% reserve or the payment of the entire debt, and the rest of the money can be used for any purpose. And here's another one. Invest the money in the bonds of the national debt of England at 8% per annum, and under this issue, the bonds of the national debt of Holland at 4% per annum. After all the manipulations, they had their 4% profit in their pocket. This manipulation was invented by around 25,000 people who lived in Holland in 1785. Approximately 5,000 of them were engaged in banking and investment activities. Of these 5,000, approximately 500 were the largest banking tycoons, not only in the Netherlands, but also in the world. These 25,000 people in Holland were divided into 2 groups, Sephardim and Ashkenazim. Ashkenazim at the end of the 16th century had more business with France and Germany. Sephardim were involved with England and the United States. Although there were also reverse examples, like Mayor Amschel Rothschild, who, being a German Jew, was a manager for William of Hesse-Kassel and was engaged in selling soldiers to the British during the French Revolution and bonuses for the dead. Since about 1785, the Bank of Amsterdam has been moving away from the principle of 100% reserve, which for 2 centuries made it the most reliable bank in the world, and moves first to 25 and then to 10% reserve. At the same time, Dutch investments in foreign banks and manufacturing were increasing significantly. Capital begins to flee from Holland. At the same time, 90% of the Dutch income was concentrated in the hands of 8% of the people. The whole country worked to make sure that these 8% filled their pockets and became even richer. The people were getting poorer. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? These 8% didn't think much about Holland. They were fine in London, New York, and Paris. They saw Holland as a place where a bunch of beggars paid taxes on foreign debt payments. To sum up, the Netherlands is a unique example of a country that has been ruined by its own domestic debt and the completely predatory, usurious, banking nature of the economy. Historians say that the surprise is not that Holland has left the arena of the great powers of Europe, but that it has stayed afloat for so long. But let's get back to the present. That's all for now. Maybe the end of the world should start with this country. Or on the contrary, do we have something to learn from them? Write in the comments what facts about the Netherlands surprised you the most. Thank you for liking this small and hopefully objective review, and see you in the next videos on Hustler.